Hello and welcome to the West Sport Show. My name's Jackson Barrett here for your Dockers Thursday afternoon preview ahead of a bumper gather round clash with Collingwood. I'm joined by Mitch Woodcock to have a look at Thursday night's game. We'll cross to Craig O'Donoghue, who is in Adelaide for it with all the news out of training today. This episode is brought to you by TabTouch. The more you know, the better it gets. Download the TabTouch app today. Real punters play here. What are you really gambling with? Mitch, thanks for jumping in and joining us. The teams have just dropped. The news for Fremantle is that there is no news. So they go in unchanged for the third straight. So the same team for the third straight game for the first time since this time last year, the Gather Round double. And Collingwood have brought in some decent names. One of them's Nick Daicos, fair player. Scott Pendlebury, fair player. And a debutant, Angus Anderson. What do you make of it all, Mitch? The Dockers are steady as they go in chasing a fifth straight win.
Yeah, it was Friday Night Lights. This is one of the games of the round, Jackson. And look, I like it from Fremantle to a certain extent. You know, they're backing in their team. 7-day break. They came home, interestingly, and then went back again on Wednesday. Look, I don't see any need to change the team unless there was injuries, which, you know, they're luckily enough there wasn't. They've obviously taken over the one emergency at this stage in Banfield. The continued intrigue around the rucks is still going to be there. The Mason Cox, Sean Darcy thing. You know, Sean Darcy didn't really dominate last week against McAndrew. You probably have to think he was the better pure ruckman on the ground, albeit Jackson was probably the more influential player at ground level. And Riley O'Brien, you know, was dropped for tonight's game against Carlton. So, you know, you could argue either way with that. And then Nathan O'Driscoll, I still stand by the fact a few weeks ago he was unlucky, but it shows the great depth at Fremantle at the moment. O'Meara, I thought, was probably on the verge, but you know, they're trusting in their senior players. There's another one there, but overall, really like what Fremantle are doing. They're playing really good football at the moment, so why change a winning formula? And the Magpies, well, we're here back in Perth, but I just saw reports over there that Daicos still a bit proppy on that calf. I watched the game last weekend against Brisbane, and he didn't look great there beforehand, obviously, because he didn't play, but any doubt over him or a Daicos at 80% is still a good player, but it really does hurt their chances. We saw how poor they were without Daicos. Pendlebury back is still a big, important player, and Angry Anderson, will be interesting to see how he goes. Great name. Few changes for them, but overall, really excited for this game, Jacko. I think it's a real blockbuster game, albeit Collingwood are hurt, as I wrote on my column on Monday, and I think they're really there for the taking.
Let's have a look at what Fremantle could have done. So you mentioned the rucks there. Mason Cox was excellent in his kind of fully fledged debut for Peel Thunder against East Fremantle on the weekend. Dominated Eric Benning, has looked really great all preseason. There was a pretty strong school of thought that potentially they might use this opportunity to rest Sean Darcy. Craig O'Donoghue's been very strong on this in the West, that they should have kind of tapped into the emotional energy around Mason Cox playing his former side for the first time, but they've resisted that. Justin Longmuir not one normally to tap into the emotional side of footy. He's a very process-driven man, and that's clearly working at the moment. The other things that they you know, Brandon Walker, they're good players in the waffle, which is excellent for them. So Brandon Walker, probably stiff. He started the season pretty well when he came in. There are others that are close. So Driscoll, you mentioned.
Jeremy Sharp's
played some good games as well, so he's there. And then Hayden Young and Michael Frederick probably both a week away. We think both a chance to play the Derby. Frederick's gone to Adelaide for a bit of a family visit, and he was involved in some appearances today as well. So I think we'll hear a little bit more of this from Cod shortly. He's on the ground there. But this is a steady Fremantle side that are backing their people and backing the way that they go about it. And it feels like the right way to take on a blockbuster clash, and a Collingwood side that are a little bit beaten up and have had to make changes and didn't look great without Daicos. You say Daicos at 80% is still a bloody good player, and you're right, but they don't have too many gears in there when he's not in there at the moment. Kane Corn said this week that no club relies on a player more than Collingwood does Nick Daicos, and I think it's pretty hard to argue with.
No, definitely. Look, what I will say on the ruck situation, as you said, you know, Mason Cox had a great game. You can only play what you can play against. Eric Benning, with all due respect, isn't probably a number one ruckman even at waffle level. You know, their number one ruckman, Ruben Maguire's out with an ACL.
Bit shorter, yeah.
So a bit tougher for him in that case. I will say this is probably the sternest test they're going to have in the ruck, Fremantle, so far this season. You know, the teams they've played, Geelong, Melbourne, although Max Gawn is an excellent ruckman, they still had 2 against him,
Yeah.
This is Oscar Steen and Darcy Cameron. So there's no respite for either Jackson or Sean Darcy in this. So when I say it's their sternest test, I mean it's going to constantly come at them with Darcy Cameron's bodywork, and then Oscar Steen's ability to leap. So a lot of pressure on Sean Darcy and Luke Jackson this week to perform, and probably more so on Darcy for Longmuir's faith in him. He's got to really repay it. So, if they can get an advantage in there for Collingwood, it may be the midfield. If, like I said, Daicos is up and about. His brother Josh Daicos, Scott Pendlebury, you think would run through there. Yeah. Still Sidebottom was sore after copying that big hit from Kitty Coleman last week. If he's a bit better and running around too. We don't know what Angry Anderson's going to look like, but from the highlights, he's a bit of a clearance machine. So, look, there is an ability for Collingwood if they're going to win. It has to come from the source. I know that says every week, but really with Collingwood's depleted defence with no Darcy Moore and their real struggles to kick a winning score with that forward line, you feel like it's more potent than ever that they get on top there.
We've heard some contrasting views on whether or not you tag Nick Daicos this week. So Xavier Ellis is writing for Tomorrow's West that you have to tag Nick Daicos. We spoke earlier in the week on the podcast around he had 43 disposals and a bucket load of clearances the day that Fremantle beat them at the MCG, but Corey Wagner kept him to 18 disposals the night they lost in Perth last year. So that obviously provides a bit of a conundrum for the Dockers. Cameron Ling believes that he's untaggable, says the competitor in me believes that no one's untaggable, but realistically, are you really going to be able to limit his influence on the game enough for it to be worthwhile? Where do you sit on it, and would you weigh up just a head-to-head and back your guys in? Because the midfield mix has looked really, really good in the last few weeks. It looks dynamic.
I would say in the first half, I thought Fremantle, this is the first half of last week's game, against Adelaide, I thought Fremantle's midfield was the Harlem Globetrotters of the AFL for a half. They were on fire.
They've had quarters like that, haven't they? Against Melbourne, against Richmond.
And if they can do that for 4 quarters, it doesn't matter if you're tagging Daicos. They should win the game and they win the clearances. I would say the tag works if it keeps with the structure of what they've got going. So obviously Wagner going in there is going to change that slightly, but if Longmuir is confident that Brayshaw, Sarong, those guys that are running through there, Murphy Reid, O'Meara, if he gets a chance, are going to still be able to put in enough effort and enough midfield minutes, enough centre bounces, and they're going to get the feed required without losing too much with Wagner being tagging in there, then I would say go for it. If they think they're not going to, like you said, Daicos had 18 when Wagner kept into that and they still lost, well, then I would probably stick with the head-to-head and just back your midfield. So it's a delicate balance, but you can always start without it and then move to it. The game's not going to get carried away too far from Fremantle, I would say, because Collingwood are going to rely on it to be a scrap. The weather's pretty horrible over there. I'm not sure what the forecast is for tomorrow, but regardless, Adelaide Oval is going to be wet tonight and it's going to be a bit soggy tomorrow. And Collingwood are just really trying to keep things into an arm wrestle. They're trying to do dogged, low-scoring games. So I don't think Collingwood are going to get 30, 40 points on you very quickly, and then you have to try and catch up. So Fremantle might have a luxury where they can start without one and then move to it later if they feel like Daicos is really hurting them.
Mitch, you broke a really interesting story this week about a Dockers fan favourite. South Australian localised Dudley is on the cusp of triggering a contract extension, which I think will be something that Fremantle fans are thrilled to hear. He came off the SSP list, originally Adelaide's NGA, and he's kicked eight goals in 3 games to start the season. Tell us about where that's at.
Yeah, so I expect it's about a handful to maybe 6 games left for him to hit a contract. So he's played all 4 games to start the year, 8 goals, like you said. Yep. Started the game with back-to-back 3-goal hauls, career best. Wasn't in the team in the pre-season. And Michael Frederick's injury, unfortunate as it was, kind of opened the door for Dudley, and he's taken it with both hands. I think it's a fantastic news story for Dudley, considering the path he's taken. But I also think it's his role this year is so much more than just kicking goals. His ability to impact as a small pressure forward has allowed Fremantle to put Bolton into the midfield and not lose that small forward presence. I would say that Dudley's not as an elite small forward as a Bolton is, but he's filling that hole quite nicely at the moment, and they're not losing anything with him and Switkowski down there without Bolton. So his role has been so pivotal, and it just shows, again, I've said this for a number of years on this podcast, Jackson, that David Walls is one of the best, if not the best, list boss in the country for his ability to find these guys. We're seeing it time and time again, from Voss to Dudley to Ryan to Cox. just the way they do this is incredible, and he's a great news story. So he will hit a trigger in the next few weeks, barring injury or a complete fall off a cliff in form.
The remarkable thing with Dudley as well in his start to the season is that they didn't pick him in pre-season. Like Charlie Murray played ahead of him in that Adelaide game in Mandurah and appeared he might have been on the outer. Then Frederick gets injured, he gets a start, and he goes on with it really nicely. He's been an important part of that forward line. Mitch, thank you. Let's get the latest odds now from TabTouch.
The Punter's Playbook, brought to you by TabTouch.
It's producer Josh here, and joining me is David Short. Shorty, Collingwood Freo, what are the markets telling us?
Yeah, g'day, Josh. Looking forward to this one. Freo go in as the favourites at $1.48. The Pies at $2.65. Line betting sits just over the 2-goal mark at 12.5 points. Couple of players to watch for Freo. Murphy Reid has been outstanding, the Rising Star winner. Last 3 games, 24, 23 and 26 disposals. So getting his hand on the ball a lot more this season. You can lock him into your SGMs, I reckon, your same-game multis at $1.48 for 20 or more, and might be a decent spec around $2.95 for 25 or more disposals. For Collingwood, well, Nick Daicos, the champ, returns, and he has had some good times against Freo in recent outings. 3 of his last 4 matches, he's amassed disposal tallies of 36, 35 and 43. So he's had a heap of the pill. He's paying $1.66 for 30 plus, $3.10 for 35 or more. And if you can reproduce that 40 plus, $7 for the punters.
Thanks, Shorty. We'll see you again next week.
Cheers, Josh.
What are you really gambling with? For free and confidential support, visit gamblinghelponline.org.au.
Now we're going to cross to Adelaide, and our boots on the ground there for the week is Craig O'Donoghue, covering all things Dockers and Eagles. Both teams are in town now. The Dockers trained today, Cod, but there was a bit of a hiccup with the weather. Tell us about it.
Well, it's fair to say I'm drier now than what I was at 10:30 this morning. The Dockers were due to train at 10:30 at Adelaide Oval, which is the home of the Sturt Footy Club, and it just went nuts. Rain started bucketing down. There was lightning, there was thunder. Joe Bridie, their footy manager, walked out in the field just as the lightning happened and went, I don't think we're going to be allowed to be out here, because if there's lightning within 10K of a training session or a game, then they have to pull stumps. And it took an hour for the lightning to disappear, so they had to figure out what to do. So in the end, they held a team meeting early rather than late. They went into the function room and signed autographs with the fans who were there and took photos with them, because there was at least 500 people there from Fremantle. So, and then they got out there for about 45 minutes afterwards. So they did get out there, but it took them some time because it just was so wet. It was only for about an hour and a half did it rain, but my God, it was wet.
If you want to see quite how wet it was and how wet Cod was, there's some vision on the West Sports socials from earlier in the day as well. Cod will have all things covered on the socials and in the paper and online this week. What did you see once they got out there, mate?
Oh, so it was just a normal captain's run, which is very much individually based. So some players don't do a hell of a lot. Some players like to get a bit of contested work in. Some players like to have some shots per goal. Alex Pearce is always doing some handball drills. I always used to love it last year when Nat Fyfe was involved, because he did juggling. And the juggling was an amazing thing to watch. And then at the end, you've got the traditional set shots for goal from the boundary line with clearly something on the line, because there's a prize amongst those players who are battling it out for something. So, but they look ready. That's the most important thing. They don't look worried by anything. And we had in the paper today, Joe Bridie talking about the fact that this feels like a normal week. And in the past, you think of the fact that against Collingwood last year, they fell over on a Thursday night. They were poor against St Kilda on a Friday night, sorry. And against Brisbane, they were poor on a Friday night as well. This team doesn't feel like it's a big occasion. They just feel like it's a normal game of footy where they get to show what they can do.
Cod, part 2 of your interview with Joe Bridie will be in tomorrow's West, and this part of the kind of story of what's an emerging rivalry between these two sides, you've set up really well in that incredibly contrasting list builds. There's been a lot made during the week of the success of Josh Tracy and Murphy Reid, who in their own ways are kind of draft steals, where in a redraft they'd be higher up the board, but in their own ways, and the way that David Walls has put this list together and the Dockers have put this list together over a period of time, because really there are very few high-end first rounders on the list. There are lots of rookie selections. There are lots of WA guys. There are guys that they've brought home after a period of time, like Judd McVeigh and Luke Jackson at varying prices. And suddenly they've put together this premiership list that has enviable depth. No one's lucky to be in the side. Guys are stiff to miss out. But then Collingwood on the other side are at the centre of this debate about the father-son system. So tell us a little bit more about that story.
Yeah, so you got Darcy Moore as the captain of Collingwood, as the son of Peter Moore, and he was a top 10 draft pick. You've got Nick Daicos, who was picked number 4 in the draft, who should have been the number 1 pick that year, but for some reason, clubs don't like to pick players when they are meant to in the bidding system, but he was a free kick for Collingwood as the son of Peter Daicos. Now, Josh Daicos is a little bit different. He was picked in the 50s, so lots of clubs overlooked him, but he's still a player that everyone knew was going to go to Collingwood. And then you got Isaac Quayer in the back line, who was an academy pick, who was from where I grew up as a kid in Victoria, played for the same footy club, and wasn't really the traditional, he's been bound from a system that wasn't going to be playing footy. He was playing footy forever. And he was a pick 13 or 14 in the draft as well. You compare that to Fremantle's forward line, which is Josh Tracy, who's a rookie, Pat Voss, who's an SSP, Isaiah Dudley, who's an SSP, Sam Switkowski, who is a mature age player from the VFL. And then you look throughout the rest of the group as well, and you got Carl Warner, who was a rookie, who was a top age player in the under-18 competition. You got Luke Ryan in the back line, who was another mature age player from the VFL. They've plucked diamonds from late in the draft or from mature age players, and they haven't had the opportunity to go and get father sons. Jaron Carr's on the list, hasn't played a game as a father son. He was really late in the draft. Yep. Brandon Walker is an academy kid, but hasn't really been what you'd be called an elite free kick like other players are. He was later in the draft as well. So this is a Fremantle list that's been built on really classy recruiting and really strong development.
I think the other thing to factor in there as well, the guys that they have picked at the top end, they've picked some gems. They've picked really well. So you think the guys that are first rounders, Brayshaw, high-end first rounders, Brayshaw, Young, Sarong, Amos, they're all going to be good players, and they've all signed long-term contracts as well. So the essential picks at the top end of the draft, they appear to have nailed as well. It's been a very impressive list build. Before we go any further, mate, check this out. A shipment of the award-winning Bowers & Wilkins PX7 S2E noise-cancelling headphones have just landed in Australia. We've got some here, and the quality is outstanding. And they're available exclusively from West Coast Hi-Fi for just $429. That's right, just $429. Hurry in and feel the experience at West Coast Hi-Fi. Obviously, all the clubs over there at once, COD, which is extremely exciting. I'm a little bit jealous. What was the atmosphere like at training? Are there Dockers fans in town, and were there Dockers fans on your plane over?
So there weren't Dockers fans on the plane over, or many Dockers fans on the plane over, although Don Pike from West Coast, the CEO, was on the plane. Matthew Pavlich was on the plane because he stayed over after the Sydney game as their CEO for Easter. Brad Wirra, the CEO of WA Footy, was also on the plane. So there's plenty of people coming over, that's for sure. The thing that stood out to me was my Uber driver on the way to Fremantle training said he has never seen so many Fremantle fans in town as what there have been this week. He said most of them actually stayed from last week. So they came over for the Adelaide game and they've stayed for the week. He said lots have been talking about going to the Barossa and just seeing the place in general and really enjoying South Australia. There was at least 500 fans there today. The facility inside the Cert Footy Club in their function room for when they did the photos and autographs, people was packed. Like there were people everywhere. So it does feel like there's going to be a hell of a lot of Fremantle fans at the game. There's lots of Collingwood people as well. I'm staying at the same hotel as what the Magpies players are staying at. It was just shared a lift down with Josh Daicos and Jack Crisp and Jeremy Howe on the way here. No sign of Nick Daicos at that point, but doesn't mean he wasn't on the bus. Saw Lockie Schultz getting onto the bus as well. But they're staying with me at the moment, so maybe we'll go and wake them up later on. Who knows? We'll see what happens.
Egg their windows or something.
Yeah, do all that sort of stuff. Yeah, just be, not really, but maybe. And it's just a good atmosphere around. So, like as I said, I was out at Sturt before. I'm now at Glenelg. There's opportunities at West Adelaide for some clubs. Collingwood are training at West Adelaide as we speak. So there's lots of things that are happening. And if you are a Freo fan and you are in Adelaide, if you get to Freo will be at a place called Next Door, which is at the Drive Tennis Centre tomorrow from 3 to 5 p.m. That's in the build-up to the game. They'll have a match preview. They'll have a DJ. They'll have giveaways. CEO Simon Garlick will address the crowd there, and there will also be a former player at that venue as well. So it's a really good opportunity if you are in town to get something different out of the build-up to a game rather than what you would normally have, and you can be part of the pre-match for all Dockers fans.
Let's hope those fans who stayed over are rewarded with 2 wins from 2 COD. It's going to be a blockbuster night. National audience on Channel 7 and the footy world all gathered in Adelaide to have a look at the Dockers, who are in red-hot form and take on a very, very strong Collingwood side. So thanks for joining us, COD. All the best tomorrow night.
Thanks, guys.
This episode is brought to you by TabTouch. The more you know, the better it gets. Download the TabTouch app today. Real punters play here. What are you really gambling with?